Welcome to Shambhala 101, Class 6, Session 6, Episode 6. Episode 6. And I called this one Tuning into the World's Energy. Right? That's what I called it. Yeah. Last week, I like to always start us with meditation, because meditation is really the bottom line, the top line and the bottom line, and everything else kind of in between. But last week I was talking about the school of Buddhism that's called the Great Perfection, which is Dzogchen in Tibetan, or Mahati in Sanskrit. And this is the view that, we tend to feel like our minds are really small, or real small, and kind of soaked in whatever emotion is happening at the time, like it's small and a little dot of happiness, or small and a little fire of anger.
I've got it adjusted. I think it'll be all right.
Kind of
Thank you.
plugged in. And then we're kind of in battle, it's us against the world. That's a very common view, how we feel. But in the view of Dzogchen, is that it's actually the opposite, that our minds are huge like the sky. And not to be woo-woo, but they don't quite belong to us, they just feel like they do. But that we're actually, our awareness is part of something really, really huge. So one metaphor is it's like the sky, and our thoughts and feelings, emotions are like clouds. They're not separate from the sky, but they aren't the sky. You know what I mean? So they're part of the sky experience. Or another metaphor I like is that our awareness, which I'll just say our mind, is like a huge ocean, and our thoughts are like the waves. So the waves aren't separate from the ocean, but if you just were, you know how it is like when you're in the ocean, you feel like the wave is all there is, but actually the wave is just this energy current, right? In this huge body of water. So there's always waves, there's always clouds. They say in Tibetan, thoughts are just the way the mind manifests, or they're like the display of the mind. Like waves are the display of the ocean. Just the ocean doing its energy thing, comes out like waves. And the implication of that for us is that when we practice meditation and we can settle ourselves so that our awareness, we could say our awareness is kind of released from that bottleneck that it gets stuck in, and then we actually experience our life that way. We experience this huge space and stuff happens in that space. And it really, that's the way meditation really works with anxiety. Doesn't suppress anxiety or any of those emotions down. It gives such a big space so that we just develop the habit of saying, oh, anxiety wave, here it comes, there it goes, right? It only seems to stay when we stay in it. So that's the Dzogchen view. And I would say that kind of observation, that's what the human mind is like, is not exclusive to Buddhism. But I think any of those, you might call them the mystical traditions, but so many spiritual, religious, wisdom traditions have that view. A couple of months ago, I went to a session on Shambhala online, and that was called Eastern Wisdom, Western Minds, or something like that, and it was Francisca Fremantle was a long time. She's an older British lady, translated the Tibetan Book of the Dead with Chogyam Trungpa. And this was her topic, and mostly she was talking about William Blake, the poet, and kept reading his poetry to us, and talk about, what she knows about the Tibetan tradition, and she's basically saying, look, William Blake knew that, he saw that, and her whole point was, we're not talking about Eastern wisdom, we're talking about wisdom. And then it's kind of like, where do you access it? Because it's not the conventional way we look at the world, but it's not exclusive to the Buddhist tradition. So the wisdom is there, it's just that we're looking for a way to talk about it with each other in some kind of metaphor so that we can grasp it, because we're human beings and we think in language and symbols and metaphors, and so we might have the illusion that you can, without concept, just grasp. Maybe you can, I don't know, but you can't. Once you grasp it, you can't explain it. You know that feeling? Once you start explaining it, the words kind of back up on themselves. So, in a place and a time where one is lucky enough to encounter access points to this kind of human wisdom, it's because there's some particular social and cultural context that people have created to make that conversation possible. And if you know, like the tradition of Christian mysticism, right? You have that time and place when it's possible, and then it goes away. And then you can't talk about it anymore, or the books get burned, or the language is forgotten, and then it's rediscovered. So, that's just the nature of human history, I think. So we talk about, in this series, which we call Shambhala 101, is Shambhala, in our way of using it, is pointing to the creation of a social context that could work for us in the West, in the modern era, to talk about the kind of profundity of the mind as an ocean, and what are the implications of that for how we are in the world. As you know, because you've been here, but the Shambhala context, it came out, it's really created by Chogyam Trungpa, the Tibetan teacher who came out of Tibet in 1959, along with so many other people. And he was trained in that Reformation movement in Tibetan Buddhism called Rinne, the non-sectarian movement where the Nyingma and the Kagyu schools primarily began to share teachings and wisdoms and philosophies and practices, and also integrate kind of what you call the secular arts like medicine and art and herbalism and I don't know what else. Astronomy, science, that kind of science. And so when we talk about it this way, we say that our tradition of Shambhala has three roots, or it's the juncture of three streams of wisdom. And so far in this series, we've talked about two of them. And one is the Kala Chakra tradition, which is that whole line of teaching that started in India, as did the other one. Started in India, came to Tibet, and it was based on that story of the king who went to see the Buddha and said, I'm real interested in Buddhism, I can't be a monk because I'm a king, I've got other things to do. So these are the teachings on how to take that wisdom, but manifest them in a society as a ruler with subjects, or as a leader helping, with a view of how are you kind and compassionate and help your people discover their true nature and the peacefulness that comes with that. So that's a whole tradition that comes with, that's the origin story, and then we watched Joanna Macy talk about the future projection of that, which is this prophecy that when things get really bad, the Shambhala king will come back. But the point of that really is that he may come back, but it's us or our incarnations that are going to be there with him as Shambhala warriors to help in the world. So part of Shambhala is really based on that trajectory and view, and particularly that metaphor of being a warrior, which we'll talk about later. That's one lineage. And then the Dzogchen is the second one. Also from India, came to Tibet with just, I can't tell you, thousands of lineage teachers over, because it really dates from 800, 900, the Nyingma, that era. So that's like 1,200 years ago. So just many, many teachers, a lot of practices, a lot of philosophy and texts, a whole retreat tradition and meditation. And in Shambhala, when we talk about that fundamental, open, worthy, unsullied, relaxed, what would you call it? Pure, unflawed quality of like a big open sky or the ocean. The language we use to say basic goodness. Basic, you don't have to make it up, it's there. Goodness because it has this wholesome quality to it. I think I said when I talked about it last week that we used to think that Trump Rivergate called it goodness just to annoy us, so that we could say, but I don't think we're good. I don't think I'm good. I know that person's not good. And we always say, well, it's not good relative to, I was good. Not that person. They always say, well, what about Hitler? He wasn't good. But in this thinking, every human being has that quality. And we get super confused and act out and are aggressive. Anyway, I was talking to somebody last week and I said, a friend of mine said that he was there, he was a really early student of Trump Rinpoche. He says, no, he picked goodness because he knew it would annoy us. And he liked, he was not an easy teacher. He liked to provoke you so you would think. The thing he didn't want was people, sycophants, that would just be around him, listening to what he said. But to actually make us think about it. Okay, so here's the third stream, and it is not from the Buddhist tradition. It's from the indigenous tradition of India, of Tibet. In our modern Western culture, we tend to think about like matter and all of these objects in the world as just kind of stuff, dead stuff, or non-human stuff, or just kind of objects in our world. A lot of times in our society, we think of them as commodities to manipulate. So you think about a forest as just a tree plantation that you could harvest, right? Just cut it down with someone else, or minerals in the soil as something that you extract. And that, everything has that kind of monetary value in our society. But we know that in, say, the Native American indigenous society, it's not like that at all. But that everything has this quality of aliveness. And if I can say sacredness, some kind of sacredness to it. So, and that's true of all indigenous cultures, I think. Even our Western cultures, if you go back enough years, you'll find that quality. Like old Old English culture where there was that whole belief in fairies and leprechauns, you know, and trees and the spirit of trees. I mean, I think it's in every culture. I think it's just our modern culture that really kind of thinned it out. But when you do live with that sense that everything around you is alive, it really shifts how you are in the world. Right? You wouldn't pollute or scar or damage something because you just would feel its aliveness. Yeah. You know, when they make fun, like you might make fun of the Vikings with all their gods or the Greeks or whatever, but if you actually were in that culture, it was like, oh, that, you don't mess with that pond because that nymph lives there. So it's not a cartoon, really. It was a way of actually honoring every moment of your life and the sacredness of that. So taking that more of a world is alive and energetic view really shifts a lot of how we are. It changes how we eat and what we eat and how we respond to things happening in our bodies, and certainly how we respond to the natural world around us. Our watersheds, etc. So, in the history of Tibet, the history of Buddhism in Tibet really starts in the late 700s, so the 8th century, with a king whose name was Trisong Detsen. He had 2 wives, or he may have had more than 2, I don't know. But 2 of his wives were Buddhists. One was from China, one was from Nepal, where Buddhism had taken root before it came to Tibet. And so he got very interested in Buddhism from his wives and their devotion and what he saw and how they manifested. So being the king, he decided he was going to import Buddhism into Tibet. And being a Tibetan, he decided that the best place to go for Buddhism was India, without a doubt. I have a friend who studies this, who said, even though Tibet is closer to China, they always thought India was the place to go, and they would go over the Himalayas. It happened through many generations. So King Trisong Detsen brought in, first he brought in a very well-respected teacher from India named Shantarakshita, who was a very pious man, monastic, wore robes, and he came to Tibet and he did what he figured was the right thing to do. He started a monastery. It was going to be a monastery, and people were going to follow all the Vinaya, all the rules of monastics in Tibet. It didn't work out. The Tibetans are not a monastic type in their natural culture. I mean, they're nomads and warriors, and they travel, and they trade, and they ride horses, and they fight battles, and it's like the monastic thing at that time did not work so well, and it was sort of a flop. And also, Tibetan at the time was an oral and not a written language, so the idea of studying texts, that was a big leap for the people of Tibet. So Trisong Detsen, I don't think he went himself, but he sent his people back to India, find me a different teacher. And the person they came up with was named Padmasambhava. It was actually, I think they say he was from Ludhiana, which I think is Afghanistan, but from that area, of course, all Indian now. Okay, so Padmasambhava was a really different kind of person. He had a troubled childhood. Kicked out of his family home and wandered around and then found these gurus to study with, and he was considered kind of a wild man. charismatic, multifaceted, and had that, I wrote down like a master of the phenomenal world, but one of those people that could almost create illusions and things and have you believe them, because he was that kind of a, how to put it, a kind of off the wall or different person. So he came to Tibet to teach, and he taught much more in a yogic style. So having students and modeling for them and teaching them on a one-to-one basis. He had a very famous student who was also his consort, and we have that banner is a picture of her. Her name was Yeshe Tsogyal. She has an interesting story, right? She was a princess, and her father kept trying to match her up with a good match among all the wealthy other landed men in Tibet, and she didn't want any of that, so she ran away and became a Shambhala student. Anyway, the main thing, what I mainly wanted to say is that one of the stories of Shambhala, how he succeeded in bringing Buddhism in Tibet, was that he came into Tibet, and the way they put it was he tamed the indigenous demons. I think in that box back there, that's our back shrine. We have a photo. We have a picture of one of them, Mahakala. In practical terms, it means that he came into the indigenous culture of Tibet, which was infused by Bon and then pre-Bon. But it was an animistic culture. You know, every mountain had a spirit, and every tree had a spirit, and the rocks and the energies and all of that. And he was able, rather than quashing that culture, he took those demons and turned them into Buddhist demons. So like that demon, Mahakala, is now a protector of Buddhism. So the story, that would be the story, is that he commanded them to protect Buddhism. And I think what it did for Tibet is that, you know, like if you look at the modern Western world, when, you know, Christianity came in, it's like all of those indigenous beings had to be suppressed, right? No, that's paganism, and we're not pagans anymore, we're Christians. So that's very separate, and then eventually you get to the point where you're burning at the stake the people that still believed in the pagan tradition. But what they did in Tibet was bring it in, bring it on. And so then the aspect of that indigenous culture that comes to us through Shambhala is a real awareness of the living energy of everything. So it's like you can see it in the way we handle our environment. You know, nothing's particularly casual. Everything has this kind of energetic, almost sacred quality to it. And part of the, even when people come and do our sequence of studies, there's a point where we really soak in that energy, really attune ourselves to it. Like, how do you walk out into the world and actually, I'm gonna say, tune in or listen to the trees? If you do, you can actually kind of feel like you can hear the trees can communicate with each other. I don't know, Jim might want to speak to that. It's an experience that it sounds weird, except I think we all have it. That where you can, if you tune in, you see, oh, the world is alive. And then what are the implications of that for how we are and how we act and behave. I would just say, like, as a last point, that, one of, I've been saying a lot because it's just so meaningful to me, that our Shambhala tradition that we have here is only 50 years old. And so it's really our task is now, I think it will be, is to see, well, how do you take this, okay, the Dzogchen, the Kala Chakra, and then this indigenous stream, I'll call it Drawla culture, and bring it into our space, like this space in Birmingham, Alabama, and make it be useful and meaningful to us. So what's the metaphors that actually do that? Here, this wisdom line is not coming into a culture where we already killed our spiritual demons, if you know what I mean, that kind of spirituality. But what is it that needs to be tamed here so that we can tune into that profundity? I'll just say one thing that I think about, that research on mycelium and how all the trees in the forest are connected to each other, and that book about the mother tree. And that's, to me, it's like the science of ecology is our way of talking about everything being alive and connected. And bringing that sort of not just purely the science of it, but somehow it has to come with honoring that. So, once you deeply know that about forests, then how do you have your economy so that you're not just commodifying everything? I don't have an answer. I pose it as a question. We can talk about it, though, in our session, but I think it's an endlessly fascinating topic. I think actually people in our world are really yearning for that level of magic, because kind of know it's out there, but you don't have the language for it, I think. And so the third part of the Shambhala tradition is, how do we tune into that quality of the world and ourselves and how we are with each other, that energetic quality. Okay, we've done all three of those streams, and what we're going to do now is pause and maybe take a stretch, and I'm going to light the shrine, and then we'll do some meditation.